Hello and welcome to the tutorial for the Long Pillow Pouf. The Long Pillow Pouf pattern is a pattern that is within my book, Get Started in Finger Knitting, and today I'm going to do a video tutorial for it. This is what the Long Pillow Pouf looks like, and this is the written instructions with picture guides within my book. If you'd like a copy of the book, I will put a link in the description for the stores that you can purchase it from. For the Long Pillow Pouf, you are going to need some chunky blanket yarn. This is jumbo size 7. You can find it at stores like Hobby Lobby. Their brand is called Yarn Bee Eternal Bliss. You can find it at Michael's, Bernat Blanket Big, yarnspirations.com, on Amazon, and a number of other places. Also in the description of this video, I will link a guide to all of the different types of yarn that I know of that you can purchase from. It is a blog post on my website, so you can go ahead and check that out if you want more options for where you can purchase this yarn. You'll need approximately 30 yards of yarn. These skeins are 28 yards each, so I will need one skein plus a little bit extra yarn, so that's why I have 2 skeins here. Beyond the yarn, you'll also need some polyfill. You'll probably need about 11 ounces of that polyfill, and you'll need a pair of scissors as well. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few quick notes. This pattern is very beginner friendly. It's the perfect next step project after making a basic blanket. But if you've never finger knit before, don't worry, this is also a great place to start. We'll go over lots of foundational skills, and the project itself is very repetitive, which makes it really great for learning. Since this is finger knitting and we aren't working with a specific size needle, everyone's loops will naturally vary. That means that the final size of your project may look a little different from mine, and that is completely normal. A little encouragement before we jump in: everyone learns at their own pace. Some people pick it up right away, while others may need a little extra time and practice before finding their rhythm, and both are totally normal. Your tension will also improve as you go, so don't worry if your loops feel a little uneven at first. I'll be walking you through each step slowly and teaching, not just demonstrating. I'll be sharing a lot of extra tips and tricks and the why behind what I'm doing, so that way you can really understand the process and you're not just going through the motions. And remember that this is a video tutorial, so you can pause, rewind, or slow it down as much as you need. Learning something new can take some time, so feel free to take breaks and come back whenever you're ready. You've got this. It may take a little bit of persistence, but you can absolutely do it. Now let's go ahead and get started with the video tutorial. So I'm going to be working with just one skein of yarn, and we want to go ahead and find the start of the skein. There we go. I'm just going to take a little bit of extra yarn off, that way I'm not just pulling at the ball of yarn the entire time. And now we are going to start with a slip knot. So first we want to make sure to leave about an 8-inch tail. So this is the very end of my yarn, 8 inches up from the start, and we're going to start our slip knot over here. So this is going to be considered our tail yarn, that 8 inches. So I'm going to grab my yarn, and I want about 4 inches in between my hands. I'm going to take my right hand and I'm going to bring it over top to the other side on my left hand, creating this loop, just like that. So again, I'm going to go about 4 inches, take my right hand, bring the yarn over, cross it over to my left hand, so we are creating a loop. So now I'm going to turn my loop towards the left slightly. I'm going to take my thumb and pointer and place it inside of that loop, and I'm going to hold on to that tail yarn down here out of the way with my pinky and my ring finger. That way the tail yarn is just out of the way. So now that I have my thumb and pointer inside of the loop, and then all the rest of the yarn is going to be considered our working yarn. So this is our tail yarn, and this is going to be our working yarn. So that is what we're going to be working with. So I'm going to take my working yarn, and with my thumb and pointer, I'm going to grab a hold of my working yarn while still being inside of this loop, grab a hold of it, and then I'm just going to put my hands on this loop as I pull through another loop with my working yarn. Just like that. So we now have our loop. This right down here is going to be our knot, so I'm going to take my tail yarn and I am going to pull down on it to tighten that loop. So we are left with just our one knot made from our slip knot. So now I'm going to make my loop a little bit smaller. Right now, my loop is about 3 tight fingers wide, We want it to be about 2 tight fingers wide, so that's going to be about 1 inch to 1.5 inches wide inside of your loop. So to make that smaller, I'm going to grab a hold of the knot that we just made, and I'm going to grab my working yarn, and I'm going to pull down on that working yarn until it's about 2 tight fingers wide. All of our loops that we make, we want to make sure that they're consistent in size, about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. So now that we have our slip knot done and we have our 1 loop up, we are going to make something called a chain. So that means that we're just going to be adding more loops to this first loop here until we have the total amount of loops on needed. For this project, we're going to need 12 loops total chained on. This loop that we made from the slip knot is going to count as loop number 1. So that means we have 11 more loops to chain on until we have 12 loops total. So with my tail yarn on the left side and my working yarn on the right side, I'm going to put my thumb and pointer back into this loop that we created. And again, I'm just holding my tail yarn out of the way with my pinky and the ring finger. I'm going to grab a hold of my working yarn again with my thumb and my pointer while in the middle of this loop. Grab a hold of it, pull up a loop, and then go ahead and straighten out that loop. So we're going to be working straight across. So we have 2 loops up total. Now to make a third loop, we're going to bring our thumb and pointer back into the last loop that we made. So that's now the second loop. Put your thumb and pointer in there. Grab a hold of your working yarn with your thumb and pointer and pull up a loop through our last loop. So as I pull up my loop, I like to put my thumb in there and kind of flick it up, allowing me to pull the loop up all of the way. And then I'm just going to straighten out my loop. So now we're just going to continue. We want to make sure that all of our loops are about 2 tight fingers wide and consistent as possible in size. As you continue, you're going to get into more of a rhythm of pulling up your loops. So if you feel like you're not pulling up your loops in consistent size, you will get the hang of it the more you do it. And we'll be pulling up a lot of loops throughout this project. So the more you do it, the more you'll get used to it and the more you'll get into the rhythm of pulling up those loops. So now I'm going to go into the last loop that we made, which is loop number 3. I'm going to put my thumb and pointer through that loop again. Take your working yarn, grab a hold of it, and pull up a loop and straighten it out. If you're not confident in the size of your loops, you can always go ahead and measure after each loop to make sure that it's 2 tight fingers wide. And then from there, you can always adjust by pulling on your working yarn to make it smaller or pulling up on your loop to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull up another loop. So put your thumb and pointer into that last loop that we made, grab a hold of your working yarn, pull up a loop, and then straighten it out. If you lose track of how many loops you are on, you can always count your loops backwards by counting each of the top loops. So we're on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you're having trouble seeing the separation between your loops, you can always pull slightly at the top loops so that way you can see that separation. So we have 5 loops on. We have 7 more loops to chain on to have a total of 12 loops for that chain row. Go ahead and pull up a loop and straighten it out. Put your thumb and pointer into the last loop that we made. Grab a hold of your working yarn, pull up a loop, straighten it out. And we're just going to continue working all the way down until we have 12 loops up total. So at this point, I'm just holding my chain out of the way with my pinky and my ring finger because we're no longer at the tail yarn, so I'm just holding it a little bit out of the way. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but I just find it helpful as I pull up my loops. So pull up a loop and straighten it out. Put your thumb and pointer in the last loop made, grab a hold of your working yarn, and pull up a loop. So I'm going to check to see how many loops I'm at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I have 11. I need 12 total, which means I just have 1 more loop to chain on. Okay, so I have my chain row complete. I like to consider my chain row to be row number 1 as well. And the reason I like to count this as row number 1, there are some other makers who like to consider the chain row to be the chain row, and then the next row to be row number 1. But because of how I count my rows and keep track of them, especially for these beginner-friendly projects, it's easier for me to count back if I count my chain row as row number 1. So we're going to consider our chain row to be row number 1, and now we're going to be working with row number 2. Before we move on to row number 2, we need to turn this chain row, or row number 1, into a circle. So here is my last loop here, loop number 12, and here's my tail yarn. So I'm going to keep my tail yarn on the left side and my working yarn on the right side. I am going to flip my working yarn up and away from me. I'm going to take my tail yarn and I'm going to pull it through that last loop made. So go ahead and pull that tail yarn through, and we're going to slide the tail yarn through until we reach the knot from the slip knot that we originally started with. So go ahead and pull it through until you reach that slip knot, just like that. So I have my tail yarn on the left side, my working yarn on the right side, and I have them facing away from me. So now that row number 1 is in a circle, let's work on row number 2. For row number 2, we are going to be pulling up loops through each of these top loops around the circle, and we're going to be working towards the right. Okay, so here's my working yarn. My working yarn is pulled through this loop right here. I'm going to take my circle and I'm going to bring it over towards the left slightly, that way we can see just a little bit better. So here is the loop that my yarn is pulled through, my working yarn. I'm going to go 1 loop down, find that top loop, and pull up a loop through there. I want my loops to be about 2 tight fingers wide. After we pull up that first loop, we're going to go to the next loop down, next top loop. Here's my working yarn. I'm going to pull as close as possible to that previous loop, and I'm not pulling from over here, so we're not leaving any slack in between the loops. So I'm going to pull nice and close and tight to the previous loop. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the next loop over and do the same exact thing. I have my pointer finger through the next loop that I want to go through. Here's my working yarn, pull as close as possible to that previous loop, pull up a loop, put my thumb in there to finish pulling up that loop, and we've got 2 tight fingers wide. Go to the next loop over and pull up a loop. So we're just going to continue doing this all the way around until we have a total of 12 loops up. Here's the last loop that I did. I'm going to go to the next top loop and pull up a loop. Next loop down and pull up a loop. So as we're doing this, you'll notice that your chain row is flipping inside out like that. That is perfectly okay. That is what we want it to be doing. Go ahead and pull up a loop. As long as you're just following the pathway, 1 down, 1 down, 1 down, it will do it naturally, so you don't have to really worry about it, as long as you're just pulling up your loops in order, going 1 down, go 1 down, and pull up a loop. So at this point, you should have 10 loops up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the last 2 loops are a little bit tricky. You'll see that our tail yarn, because our chain row was flipping inside out, it is now facing up. So the first thing I'm going to do is push my tail yarn through the center of this hole, and so that way it's facing down. So here is the last loop that I made. If you go to the next space over, that is going to be the knot from the slip knot. I know on camera it looks like maybe it could be a next loop. If you feel it, you'll see that it is a knot and that you can't put your loop through it. So we are going to go to the next space over, which is where the tail yarn is pulled through. So I'm going to pull this loop closer to that slip knot so we're not having any gaps. And then I'm going to put my finger through that loop. Again, that's the same loop that the tail yarn is pulled through. And I'm going to pull up loop number 11. So I'm skipping over that slip knot and pulling up a loop through the same loop that the tail yarn is pulled through. So now if you just turn your work, you can just straighten out your work by pulling on the tail yarn and the loop that you just pulled up. So that was loop number 11. And now for loop number 12, we are going to go through this loop right here. You'll notice that this loop is pointing inward instead of side to side like the rest of them were. So I'm just going to take my finger, put it through that loop. I'm going to twist it slightly so that way it's now facing side to side. And then I'm going to pull up a loop through there. Okay, so now let's just count to make sure that we have 12 loops up total for row number 2. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So if you're not happy with how your first 2 rows are looking, and if you want to start over and try again, you can definitely do that. You just want to make sure that you have 12 loops up total, and that each of your loops are 2 tight fingers wide, and that they're all close knit and tight together, and there aren't any gaps in between each of the loops. So now we're going to move on to row number 3. Row number 3 and beyond is where things get much easier. And I also wanted to add quickly, if you are someone who prefers to use a stitch marker to help you count your rows, you can use a stitch marker, you can use a scrap piece of yarn, or you can even use a hair clip. So for my stitch marker, I like to put that in the last loop that we made, which is going to be the last loop of the row. So this is going to tell me that I need to go through this last loop to finish up my row. I'll teach you another way as well if you didn't want to use a stitch marker at the end of this row. But for now, let's move on to row number 3. I'll just keep my stitch marker here for now as well. So now we're going to continue working towards the right. You want your working yarn now facing towards you, and we want to be pulling up loops going towards the right around the circle. So for row number 3, we are going to simply knit 12 loops around the circle. So here's my working yarn. Here is the last loop that I made. Here is my next loop. So this is the first loop of row number 3. I'm going to place my pointer finger through there. I'm going to take my working yarn and I am going to pull up a loop through this loop. So when I pull up my loop, I want to make sure I'm grabbing as close as possible to that previous loop and I'm not grabbing from over here. So go ahead and grab your working yarn and pull up a loop. I like to put my thumb in there and kind of flick it up to pull that loop through. And again, you want to make sure that your loops are about 2 tight fingers wide. So we pulled up our first loop. Now let's go to the next loop over towards the right. Go ahead and insert your finger through that loop. And then we're going to make sure to grab as close as possible to that previous loop when we're pulling up our working yarn. I'll show you quickly what it looks like when you grab too far away from that loop. So if you grab your working yarn from over here instead of as close as possible to that previous loop, if you pull that up, you'll see that you'll have slack in between your 2 loops, which is going to create gaps and holes within your project, and it's not going to be as tight knit. So all this extra yarn will be in between your loops, so when you go to stuff it, it's not going to look very tight knit. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out, and then I'm going to pull up the loop correctly. So I'm going to go as close as possible to my previous loop and pull it up, just like that. So you'll see that we don't have any slack in between our loops. So I'm going to go to my next loop over, and I'm going to pull up the loop the exact same way. Go as close as possible to the previous loop, pull up a loop, and make sure that loop is about 2 tight fingers wide. If you're not liking inserting your finger in here and pulling up the loops the way that I have been, I'll show you another way as well. So I'm just going to put my work down on the table because it's just a little bit easier to do it on a table the way that I'm about to show you. But I'm going to grab a hold of my next loop here, and I'm just going to push up a loop going from the back side towards the front, and I'm going to take my working yarn and push the loop up like that, and then you can grab the loop to straighten it out. Doing it that way definitely works, and you can always check to make sure you have your loops at 2 tight fingers wide, but it is a little bit harder to make sure that your loops are tight knit when you push up your loops this way. So you can definitely keep going around doing it that way. Just make sure that you're pulling your loops nice and tight and close to that previous loop before you push up that loop. So for each new loop, make sure you pull it nice and tight before pushing up a loop from back to front. So that's definitely one way to do it. I'm definitely someone who prefers to do it this way. That way I can grab as close as possible to that previous loop and then pull up. Everyone's going to prefer something different as to what's easiest for them and what also works best for their fingers. Everyone's going to have a different point of what is comfortable for them. So feel free to do whichever way works for you. You just want to make sure that your loops are 2 tight fingers wide and make sure that they're nice and close together, each of your loops. So we're just going to continue working around in the circle, pulling up loops as consistent in size as possible and as tight knit as possible. Here's the next loop and pull it up. So I'm at my stitch marker, so that means I have to go through this loop to finish row number 3. So I'm going to take my stitch marker out and I'm going to pull up my loop. If you're not using your stitch marker, you can always count your loops. Each row is going to be 12 loops, so you can count around. And once you've hit 12 loops, that's how you know you've finished your row. Or another way to look at it, we have our tail yarn down here. So once you're lined up with your tail yarn, if you knit one more loop over, that is how you know that you've finished your row. So your second to last loop, if you go straight down, that's going to line up with your tail yarn. That's how you know you've finished your row. So for row number 4, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to knit 12 around the circle, working towards the right, making sure each loop is 2 tight fingers wide, and making sure that we're pulling up as close as possible to our previous loop. So we're just going to knit 12 all the way around. Don't worry about the speed that you are pulling up your loops. If you need to pause the video in order to catch up, you can definitely do that. Or if you're someone who's working a little bit faster than I am, you can also speed up the video as well. So you'll see that I'm lined up with my tail yarn. So that's how I know that I need one more loop to finish row number 4. So if you're looking at your project, it looks like your loops are horizontal instead of these vertical loops here. That just means that your project is inside out. So at this point, you can just flip your work like that, and you will be on the right side. So now I want to show you how to count your rows backwards in case you ever lose track of your rows. So once you finish a row, you can always count going backwards. So here is the last loop that I made. So I count that as number 1, and then I'm going to go down to that next loop. That's 2. Here's my next loop, 3. And then down here is my chain row, so that is 4. So I just finished row number 4. You can always pull slightly to see the separation of your loops to help you count backwards. So at this point, things are going to be very repetitive. We're just going to continue pulling up loops all the way around. For my long pillow poof pattern, I do a total of 28 rows. So right now we have 4 rows on total. So that means we have 24 more rows to go around until we've finished the long pillow poof. So that means we need to knit 12 more loops 24 more times until we have completed the knitting portion. My long pillow poof ends up being about 18 inches long by the time I'm done with my 28 rows total. But if you wanted a shorter pillow poof, you could definitely do that. So it's kind of like a little nugget pillow poof. Here's the great thing about this project is that you can go as short or as long as you want. If you want to make an extra long pillow poof, you can continue adding as many rows as you would like. If you want to go to 30 rows, 35, 40 rows, you can keep going as long as you know how to attach a new skein, which we'll be going over a little bit later. And as long as you have enough yarn, you can continue to go for as long as you want. But if you wanted a shorter pillow poof, you can cut it short as well. So you don't have to go up to 28 yards total. If you only have 1 skein of yarn on you, you can continue to go until you've just run out of yarn, and that can be the length of your pillow. So the long pillow poof is definitely customizable, but I like to do 28 rows, and that is my preferred length for my long pillow poof. So that is what I'm going to do for this video, and that is the pattern within my book as well. So now let's move on to row number 5. We're going to do the same exact thing, and we're going to knit 12. So here's my next loop over, pull up a loop, and we're just going to continue working towards the right, pulling up loops. At this point, we're just going to continue pulling up loops all the way around. I'm not going to stop to count my loops very frequently. I'll start counting my loops back again as I get towards the end. But you can use your stitch marker and count each row as you go if that is your preferred method, and you can get a piece of paper and tally down how many rows you've done. There's definitely a lot of different ways that you can count your rows, so feel free to do whatever works best for you. Okay, so I'm already past row 5 and I'm on row 6 already. At some point, I am going to stop and continue working on my loops and rows off camera, so I'll have you pause the video, but for now I will knit a little bit longer with you. Once I run out of yarn from this first skein, I will be back with you to show you how to attach your skein of yarn. A new skein of yarn, I should say. So that way you'll know when to press play again. It's pretty much just whenever you run out of yarn and you're ready to attach a new skein. Okay, so I'm lined up with the tail yarn, so I know I have one more loop to go to complete this row. And now I'm just going to count backwards to see how many rows I've completed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I have 7 rows on. Here's how it's looking so far. So I'm going to work on row number 8. And after row 8, we're going to press pause. You're going to continue pulling up loops until you are ready to add another skein of yarn. Or if you're ready to close off your pillow and finish it and you did a shorter pillow, I'll put a timestamp on the screen after this if you want to just jump over there to see how to stuff and close up your pillow. Okay, so I've already gone one over from where the tail yarn lines up, and I have 8 rows on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 for the chain row. So go ahead and continue pulling up loops. Once you are ready to press play, I am going to be back with you to show you how to add a new skein of yarn. And just a reminder, we are aiming for 28 rows total for our Long Pillow Pouf project. Okay, so I've knit quite a few more rows, and now we can count them together to see how many rows I ended up with. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. So I just have one more row to knit. So I'm going to grab my new skein of yarn and I'm going to attach my skein of yarn. So we need a little bit of yarn so we can tie a double knot. And I'm going to go directly behind the last loop that we made right here, and we are just going to tie a double knot on the back side of this loop. Go ahead and tie that double knot. Make sure that that knot is pretty snug, so I'm going to pull on both directions to make sure that's nice and tight. I'm going to pull that loop back in, and I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut the excess yarn off, so I'm left with just that one strand of yarn. So I'm going to cut not too close to the knot, but fairly close. Just like to make sure that there's some extra yarn on either side to account for any slippage that might happen with the knot over time. So I'm just going to make sure that that knot sits directly behind that last loop that we made. And then we can continue knitting like normal, keeping that knot right on the back side of the project. So for me, I just have 12 more loops to go to finish up until I have 28 loops total. For you, that might be more or less, depending on what row you ended up at, or if you wanted to add even more rows than the 28. So here is the loop that is lined up with the tail yarn, and I've already gone one over. So now at this point we can take our scissors and we can cut our working yarn, leaving about 8 inches of yarn. So now I'm going to close up the bottom of the pillow poof. The bottom of the poof is going to be these closed off loops here. The top of the pillow poof is going to be where we just ended, where all of these open loops are. So to close up the bottom, we are going to be working towards the right. So here's my tail yarn. We're working towards the right, and we're going to be going through each of these bottom loops, pulling the tail yarn through it. So go ahead and find that first bottom loop to the right of your tail yarn. And then going from the outside towards the inside of your project, pull your loop through there, pull, and then I like to wrap my fingers around the loop that we just pulled the yarn through, and then pull to tighten it. Make sure you pull enough to where it is closing and you can feel the yarn pulling, but not too hard to where your yarn is going to snap. So go ahead and pull that yarn through from outside to in, and then pull to tighten. Here's my next loop to the right. Pull the yarn from the outside of the project towards the inside of your project, and then wrap your hands around and pull to tighten. So we're just going to work all the way around until we've closed up the bottom completely. Here's my next loop from the outside towards the inside and tighten. So you'll see that the hole is starting to close up at the bottom. Just a few more. Next one. Okay, here's my last one. If your hole doesn't close up all the way, you can always go across from where your tail yarn is. Go across the way. Take your tail yarn, pull it through that side, and then back up the inside of your project, right in the center of the hole that we just closed up, and then pull, and that's going to close it all the way. Now just do an overhand knot at the base of this yarn. And you can do a double knot also, but now the hole that I closed up is pretty small, so I'm just going to do a single knot, but you can always do a double knot to make sure it's extra secure. And then I'm going to find the center of the hole that we just closed up and push the excess yarn and knot to the inside of the pillow. Okay, so the bottom is closed, and now we can stuff the long pillow poof. So I'm going to work with just a little bit of polyfill at a time. And I'm going to insert it from the open end all the way down to the base or the bottom of the pillow. So you want to make sure that you stuff the bottom enough and that we don't forget about the bottom. So work from the bottom towards the top. So another little bit of polyfill and push that in all the way down towards the bottom. So the polyfill is going to help shape the pillow. So you can see where it's been filled and then where it hasn't been filled. So I'm just going to continue stuffing a little bit at a time. Working my way up. So the more polyfill you add, the firmer your pillow is going to be. The less you add, the softer and squishier it will be. You don't want to overstuff your pillow too much because the more you stuff it, the more gaps you will see in your project, and you might see a little bit of polyfill, especially if your project is a little bit more looser knit. Your project did end up a little bit more looser and you see a little bit more gaps and holes in your project. I would definitely go a little bit lighter on the polyfill. Okay, so mine is almost full. Okay, so once you have stuffed the pillow, we can go ahead and close up the top of the pillow. Okay, so here is my excess yarn. Here's the last loop that I made. And this time we are going to be working towards the left. So grab your yarn and we're going to be going through each of these open loops. So here's my next loop over, and this time we are going to be working from the inside of the project towards the outside of the project. So take your yarn, pull it through that next loop, and pull it through. This time we are not going to tighten as we go. We're going to tighten every few loops. So go from the inside towards the outside, inside towards the outside. And I'm just going to do one more loop before we tighten it. Inside towards the outside. So before we tighten our loops, I want to make sure to grab the last loop of the row that we'll be going through. I'm going to turn it this way so you can see a little bit better. But as I tighten it, if I don't put my thumb or finger in here, as you pull, these loops are going to slip out. So we want to make sure to prevent that. So I'm going to put my thumb, or you can put a pointer finger in there. That way it doesn't. So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to tighten those loops, just like that. And now I'm going to continue working around the circle, going through each of the loops. Outside. Okay, so I'm going to grab a hold of that last loop before tightening. At this point, I feel like I can add some more polyfill, so I'll do that. But I've also noticed that this loop here slipped out. So in order to fix that, I am going to grab this excess yarn. Here's this loop, and I'm just going to pull up a loop, pull the loop up through there. So now all of the loops are back together. So I'm going to stuff the pillow with just a little bit more polyfill. So I want to make sure that it's nice and full at the very end and the top as well as the bottom. Okay, so now I can continue closing up the top. Okay, so I just have one more loop to go, but I'm going to tighten it first. And then go through that last one. Just like that. And then I'm just going to close it just a little bit more. So if you need to close up your circle a little bit more, you can do that same trick that we did at the bottom by pulling your tail yarn across and then back out through the center and then tighten it. But I feel like this one doesn't need it as much, so we are just going to do an overhand knot at the base of this yarn. And then I'm going to tuck the excess yarn and knot to the inside, just like that. Okay, and just like that, our long pillow poof is all done. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. Let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know if there are any additional questions that you have, and I'd be happy to answer them. Just a reminder that the written pattern for the long pillow poof, along with 17 other projects in my book, is also available, and it's linked in the description below. I did write this book with beginners in mind, so it goes through a lot of the foundational steps that we've learned in the video tutorial, and it goes into a lot more projects as well. So we have the blanket, the Long Pillow Pouf, of course, the stress ball buddy, which the written instructions are in here, but I also have a free video tutorial on my YouTube channel as well if you wanted to try that out. It's a lot of the same foundational skills, but you learn how to add some eyes, and you just end up with a really cute stress ball buddy. And then beyond that, we go into a bunch of different animals, a bumblebee, a 5-in-1 pattern of birds, a hen, duck, mallard, eagle, and flamingo. We have an octopus, pickle, which this one is really cute. It's one of my favorites, Petunia the pickle. Whale, shark, walrus, and seal. Those are the 4-in-1 sea animals. And then 2 intermediate projects, an elephant and a pig. Those are written instructions within this book. And here's the pig, but I do have a video tutorial coming out very soon. That one is going to be a paid version on my website. I will link my website in the description as well if you want to check that out. I have a lot more video tutorials available on my website. A few of them are just video tutorials, but a number of them are video tutorials plus written instructions and picture guides, which makes things really easy for you. But the video tutorial for the pig and elephant will also include mini versions that are not included within the books. So that's a fun little added feature in the video tutorial only. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.